Hi, welcome to the Raven and the Writing Desk. This is Dr. Gordo, and we are continuing our series on what are the different kinds of clauses. In today's edition, we're talking about dependent clauses. What are dependent clauses, and why should I care? I think we should care because dependent clauses are a great example of the magic of language. As we can see, we're going to take a series of sounds that don't make sense on their own, but give them meaning by teaming them up with an independent clause. So let's take a look at how to do that. As a quick recap, an independent clause is a subject and a predicate. The excited gamer squeezed around the computer. This functions as its own sentence, and that's what an independent clause is. It's a regular sentence, not a whole lot of razzle-dazzle. A dependent clause, however, also known as a subordinate clause, is an incomplete thought. A dependent clause needs an independent clause in order to make sense. So let's take a closer look. If you're not going, then I'm not going. He purchased a mobile which he could not afford. Both these sentences contain an independent clause and a dependent clause. An independent clause is going to make sense on its own. A dependent clause needs help. So when we read these sentences as word groups, what group makes sense on its own and what needs help? If you're not going, then I'm not going. If you're not going, you can hear it, can't you? It needs more information. And also the fact that that sentence starts with a conjunction. And if you're not sure about conjunctions, we have a video on that. And it ends in an adverb. If you're not going, then. Okay, so we have clear road signs here that that part of the sentence is going to need some help. I'm not going. I'm not going. Subject, predicate. Okay, we've got our indie clause. I'm not going. So if you're not going, then is the dependent clause. Those words only make sense because of the second part of the sentence. Let's take a look at the second sentence. He purchased a mobile which he could not afford. So when we're looking for a dependent clause, we're watching out for conjunctions, pronouns, and adverbs as they tend to set up a dependent clause. Okay, well, he's a pronoun. He purchased a mobile. He purchased a mobile. Well, that makes sense on its own, doesn't it? He purchased a mobile, subject, predicate. Okay, so what about the second part of the sentence? Which he could not afford. Which he could not afford. If that sentence was all by itself, it doesn't make sense, does it? Which he could not afford. What is it that he's talking about? What is the which? What is that referring to? It's a dependent clause. It's subordinate to the information that came first. He purchased a mobile which he could not afford. So as you can see, what I'm doing here is I'm saying the sentences aloud and identifying. Do a group of words make sense on their own? Yes. Independent clause. A group of words not making sense of their own? Dependent clause. So let's take a look at the different types of dependent clauses. There are three types altogether: adjective or relative clauses, noun or nominal clauses, and adverbial clauses. You do not need to know these terms unless you're an English teacher. It's more important to be aware of what they can do to help your writing. And wow, these are some powerful tools. First up, adjective or relative clauses. As we all know, adjectives modify nouns. And if you didn't know that, we have a video on it. So I put up a sentence here. I would like one of those microphones that we saw at the store. I would like one of those microphones that we saw at the store. I would like one of those microphones. I would like one of those microphones. Independent clause. We have a subject and a verb. that we saw at the store, when you say it by itself, it becomes quite obvious that it's a dependent clause. But what is it modifying? It's modifying the word microphone. I would like one of those microphones. Well, what microphones am I talking about? Well, the ones we saw at the store. So that word group at the end comes together to form an adjective clause. Again, do you need to know that term unless you're an English teacher? Probably not. But as a writer, it's important for you to know what the different words in a sentence are doing for you. Because if you don't know what the words are doing for you, well, then you've got a problem. Either you need to edit or get rid of those words altogether. Let's take a look at the next example, because I think it really starts to make these dependent clauses start to become more clear. Before we move on, I'm just going to underline that and put ACDC just to show that adjective clause, dependent clause. In the noun or nominal clause, something really special happens here because a group of words come together to form a noun in itself. It is usually the job of the independent clause to set up a diving board, if you will, so that the dependent clause has an opportunity to dive. Let's take a look at the independent clause. I hate TikTok. It's a solid sentence. Subject, verb, noun. I hate TikTok. The subject-verb combination in English is so strong that you can put pretty much whatever you want after it, and the nonsense that comes afterwards can make sense because of that subject-verb, that independent clause that sets things up. I hate scrolling through stupid videos. In this case, scrolling through stupid videos is a noun or a nominal clause. It's a noun in itself. Subject, verb, noun. I hate scrolling through stupid videos. I hate riffraff. I hate squibbly squat. I hate this, that, and the other thing. As I'm saying, you can put a whole lot of different partial meanings after that subject verb, and it's still going to make sense thanks to the power of the nominal clause. And then if that doesn't make sense, I hope this last one will. The adverbial clause. The adverbial clause modifies verbs, adjectives, and other adverbs. In other words, everything else. I put together a tricky sentence here. They doubt that you're right. They doubt that you're right. Where is the independent clause? They doubt. Okay, subject, predicate. Okay, that's potential. Oh, well, we have the word that in there. And I need a whole other video on what happens when the word that happens in the middle of a sentence because, well, a whole bunch of different crazy things can happen. But in this case, they doubt that should be an indicator that the beginning part is the dependent clause. They doubt that. Well, what is it that they're doubting? Well, they're doubting that you are right. Your right is the dependent clause and is being modified with the word group, they doubt that. So in this case, they doubt that becomes the adverbial clause. So I'm going to underline they doubt that. And I'm going to mark your right as the independent clause. So that you can see they doubt that modifies your right. They doubt that, that's the adverbial clause. You're right, that's the independent clause. What I am trying to show you here is how the dependent clause gives you a great opportunity to add a wide range of details to whatever it is that you're talking about. And it's also a good chance to experiment with different sentence strategies because the dependent clause could potentially happen at the beginning, middle, or the end of the sentence, depending on what it is that you want to get across to the reader. Because it is important to know the placement of the dependent clause is going to change the meaning of the sentence. I have two sentences here. She told me about the game at school. At school, she told me about the game. Two very different sentences, even though they contain the same words. This shows you the power of arrangement in your sentences. Because in the first sentence, she told me about the game at school. That's not a clear sentence. Even though it is using the active voice, you've got she told me up front. And if you're not sure what the active voice is, please watch the video on that after this. Well, what is that she's telling me? Is she telling me about a game that happened at school? Or while we were at school, she told me about a game that happened outside of school? Which is it? Because if it's the latter, it makes more sense to say at school, she told me about the game. Then it's perfectly clear where we were, what we were talking about, and so forth. The use of dependent clauses is also going to play a big part in how we use commas. I can't make one video on how to use commas because it all depends on the circumstances. So whenever I'm talking about commas in my videos, take a moment to take it in because commas are probably the trickiest mark of publication. But let's wrap this up. So DC recap, dependent clause recap. Dependent clauses have a subject and a verb but are incomplete. They must be linked to an independent clause in order to make sense. If you're an English teacher, you'd be happy to know there's 3 types of dependent clauses: adjective, noun, and adverbial. But if you're just a regular old writer, you're not too worried about the names of the terms. You just know that dependent clauses are incomplete thoughts that can be used to complete a great thought. And you're going to try using them in different ways in your writing, try out different placements, and see what you come up with. In the meantime, you can watch some more of my videos, such as the active versus passive voice, or something a little bit lighter. There's one on adjectives, and of course, there's a whole bunch of other great videos you can watch. So, in the meantime, like, subscribe, and when it comes to any of the videos, please put your questions down in the comments, and I'll do my best to get back to you. And I will talk to you in the next video. See ya.